Recently, 4 Muslim countries joined the BRICS Alliance. The last time we joined an alliance, we lost the khilafa. Are we going to repeat the same mistakes, or is the world in a different position today? Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Ummah Matters. My name is Firdaus Khan Angarhari. The BRICS countries started an informal alliance in 2009. This month, in August 2023, they invited 6 more countries to join the alliance. 4 of these were Muslim countries, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE. The last time something similar took place was during the First World War, also known as the Great War. But back then the Muslims had a khilafa. Though it was very weak, but it was a symbol of Muslim unity in the world. If we look at the events that were taking place in the world, most of them were happening in Europe. Before the Great War, Europe was divided in 2 major camps. You had the Triple Entente, formed by Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other side there was a Triple Alliance, formed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These were the 2 rival alliances. Now, one event which historians call as the trigger of the World War II was the assassination of Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand. He was assassinated on the 28th of June 1914 by a Slav nationalist, Gabrielio Princip. So before the Great War, you had 2 major alliances, the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. During the war, some countries shifted their positions, but you again had 2 major camps. You had the Central Powers, formed by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and a new player, the Ottoman Empire, or the Osmani Khilafah. The other camp was of the Allies. So France, Great Britain, Germany, Japan, and later on the US also joined the alliance. The first war, the Great War, took 4 years. More than 8 million soldiers died, and it is estimated that more than 13 million civilians also died. It was a war unlike any war in human history because of the technological advancement of the parties involved. The destruction and the human costs was very high, and the Allies won the war. About a year after the end of the World War I, the Treaty of Versailles was signed on the 28th of June 1990. And this treaty had some bad consequences for Germany, which we will see later on. This war changed the world. The map of Europe was changed forever. 4 empires collapsed because of the war, and the United States emerged as a world power. What also happened was the loss of the Osmani Khilafah. There was a treaty by the name of Treaty of Sèvres. It was signed in 1920, and about 2 years later, in 1922, the Khalifa was exiled and the Khilafah was abolished. And this is when the Republic of Turkey was also established. Muslims, since the time of Prophet ﷺ, we always had a Khalifa, a leader. Sometimes it was the Khilafah of the Muslims was very strong, sometimes it was very weak, but it is now the first time in our history that we lost the Khilafah, and more than 100 years later, we still have not got the Khilafah back. We have been unable to establish something we had before. There is the OIC, which was established in the second half of the last century, but many people say that the OIC is ineffective. And the Muslim world since then, since the loss of the Khilafah, has not been able to become politically very close. Now, the period between the First and the Second World War is called interbellum, or the interwar period. Many key events took place during this time, and the League of Nations was also established. It was a predecessor of the United Nations, but it was very ineffective, and the purpose of it was to prevent any other big war that might happen in the future, because people were very terrified because of the First World War. But the League of Nations failed to achieve its goals. Also, during this period, new nations emerged, many movements took place, but about 21 years later, the Second World War started. One of the main causes of the Second World War was the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed by the end of World War I. Germany was very devastated by it, and it got very angry. There was an economic depression in the US, and there were many movements like Nazism and fascism. All of these are considered as the causes that led to the big next war, the Second World War. Now, the Second World War was fought between the Allies, that's France, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. And the other camp was the Axis powers, so Germany, Italy, and Japan. In the Second World War, more than 70 million people died, and the Allies won the war. After the war, the US emerged as a world superpower. It was probably the most powerful nation with the strongest economy, the strongest military, and the biggest influence around the world. By the end of World War II, a new war also started, what is known as the Cold War. It was a rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States. During this war, these two big powers did not engage in a direct conflict, but they did engage in proxy wars. For example, if we look at Afghanistan, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and supported the then regime, the communist regime of Afghanistan. But on the other side, you had the Mujahideen who were fighting the invasion of the Soviets, and the United States supported them with military and all the equipments that they needed to fight the war. So these two big powers did engage in these types of wars, but there was no direct conflict between them. However, the Soviet Union collapsed by the end of the 20th century, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States emerged as the sole supreme power on earth. We entered a phase what is called the unipolar world. There was probably no one to challenge the United States. But in less than 2 decades' time, things started to change. At the beginning of the 21st century, in 2001, an economist, he used the term BRIC to the most rapidly growing economies of the world. But some years later, in 2009, those countries formed an informal alliance of the BRIC Alliance. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS is a corporation of these countries in the fields of economy, development, and global governance. These countries represent more than 40% of the world population, and this alliance is also trying to have its own alternatives for the World Bank and the IMF. They have realized that the United States, because of its dominance on the financial market, the US dollars and the banking system, it can sanction countries like what they did to Russia. So this alliance is trying to have its own monetary system, hoping that the US influence will decrease. Like just imagine, in a 30 years' time, two of the world's biggest economies are part of the BRICS alliance, and if they start to trade with one another using their local currencies or using a currency backed by BRICS, during this phase, the United States dollars will no longer be in a dominant position around the world. And it is very likely that by 2050, the BRICS countries will represent more than the half of the world's population, more than the half of the world's economy, and probably will have the biggest military alliance around the world. And that is not something unlikely because the BRICS countries are expanding. Only this year, the 15th BRICS summit took place in South Africa, and 6 new countries were invited to join the alliance. You know, there's a famous saying that the only lesson we learn from history is that we learn no lessons. So today you have the Western Alliance led by the United States in a very powerful position. You have rising economies and militaries that are challenging the position of the United States, and they are forming alliances, and this will probably get bigger. And I really hope that this will not lead to a next big war. God forbid, if that happens, it will be probably the worst war in human history. You know, I had read somewhere that, I don't know if it was the quote of Albert Einstein, but it said like, the person had said that, I don't know what weapons will be used during the Third World War, but people will be fighting the Fourth World War with sticks, indicating that if a next big war takes place, human civilization will be destroyed. But we don't know what happens in the future. To me, it looks like that more and more Muslim countries will be joining this alliance, but I really hope that we get some inspiration and we, like, even if it's the OIC or something new, that the Muslim countries will have a more effective union of their own to defend the rights of the Muslim countries in a world that is probably going to be influenced by major alliances. So hopefully these alliances that are forming, they lead to a better and peaceful world. Sometimes it's really scary if as a Muslims we look at the signs of the end times, and may Allah protect us all, but it is predicted in the Islamic scriptures, even the Christian scriptures, that big wars will take place and a lot of people will be killed during these wars. And it comes to the wisdom of world leaders. If we have wise, intelligent people in power who take right decisions to prevent conflicts, the world will be at peace. But if you have unwise leaders ruling maybe two big countries, two big powers in the world, that is enough to start the next big war. Thank you very much for your time. See you in the next video.